That there's some really very serious concerning things now. I have previously spoken about obviously the undercover footage that's come out of John Sweeney in relation to BBC Panorama very recently, but this is a completely different programme, BBC Panorama, and the reason that we're here and that our interest is because we are campaigning to expose an establishment cover-up of child abuse, but really to campaign for mainstream media journalists, professional organisations, the so-called mainstream media, to look into these kind of stories. We do believe that they're failing to do that at the moment. So Robert, first of all, if you could just introduce yourself. You live here in London, you're from up north, and you started off in journalism in local newspapers, and really in the last sort of 5.5 years you've been working solely as an investigative journalist and researcher on this BBC Panorama documentary called Saving Syria's Children, which was broadcast in 2013. So can you tell us a little bit about your interest and how this came about?
Right. Well, yes. I mean, I was interested in. I've been interested in the media for a long time, and this report. Well, there was initially a BBC News report which was broadcast on the 29th of August 2013, and this was at the precise moment that Parliament was voting on whether to join America in bombing Syria, and just as the Parliament was voting, the BBC broadcast this report of what they claimed was a napalm attack on the school playground, but it was the footage in particular of the victims arriving at a nearby hospital, which looks a bit strange, and a lot of people felt it was quite strange. Anyway, I didn't do anything immediately, and a month later BBC Panorama broadcast a programme called Saving Syria's Children, which was including more footage from this alleged attack. And that's when I began writing for the BBC using its complaints correspondence. And as I continued with my letters to the BBC, I began doing my own research. And a lot of strange things started to appear, like nobody could agree when this event supposedly happened. Human Rights Watch say it happened around midday on the 26th of August. The reporter concerned, Ian Pannell, said it was 5:30 p.m. It's a whole range of times given for this.
What I would say is anyone that's watching, I'm going to be interviewing Robert again shortly and showing you some of this footage. It's not just that. This caught the attention of a BBC Radio 4 television and radio producer called Victor Lewis-Smith, is that right?
Yes, a couple of years ago, yes.
And he actually approached BBC Panorama, wanted to have a meeting with him, wanted some answers, and because they didn't talk to him and explain the bizarre footage that they've shown, he ripped up his contract, is that right?
That's right, yes. And then Victor got in touch with me, and we're now planning to crowdfund a documentary about this issue.
Well, I'm a former BBC journalist. I worked for the BBC for a couple of years. I worked for ITV for a long time as well. And I have tried to talk to some of the people that I used to work with, journalists, because I think it's very important that we investigate and hold those in power to account, and I'm not quite sure journalists are really doing their job at the minute. My interest really spiked when a producer who worked on that documentary called Riam Delati tweeted, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, saying that in the last 6 months of his own investigations he can say without a shadow of a doubt that the chemical attacks at the hospital were staged.
He was talking about the alleged chemical attack at the hospital in Douma last year.
One in Douma, a different one.
A separate incident, yeah.
But he was also involved in the documentary, though, from 2013.
He was a researcher on that documentary, so I don't know him. I haven't really spoken to him, but it is interesting that, because I believe that Saving Syria's Children was a faked atrocity, and it's interesting now that he's coming out and claiming that that more recent attacks might have been staged.
Well, there's two people who work for the BBC. Well, I used to work for the BBC as well. Victor Lewis, Riam Delati, myself. We've all hold, professional journalists. We've all raised serious concerns, and my investigation at the moment is being linked to sort of the IPP files and the cover-up that we've been looking at with John Wedger, former Scotland Yard detective. But this is really about the media, and it's been incredibly frustrating for you, I understand, in that you've had a long discussion with the BBC executives. You've shown them the footage, which we're going to have a look at. If anyone wants to have a look at it today, before we put that report together, it's on Media on Trial. It's age-restricted, isn't it? And it's Robert Stewart. So what problems have you had because you've obviously taken a look at this documentary, you've done a lot of research, you've even found somebody that was in it owning up to actually acting. saying that it was staged. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I mean, yes, somebody. She didn't actually own up to acting in it, but somebody did contact me to ask me to remove some images from Facebook and from the program, which she wasn't actually in those images. But when I did locate her in some footage from the event, not BBC footage, but from the same hospital on the same day. So this is somebody who took part in this fabrication, who I now have a name and an approximate location in the Netherlands for, and which is quite astonishing. And I flagged this with plenty of journalists, and there's been zero interest in tracing this person and interviewing her.
So who is she? Tell us exactly who she is and what she did.
I'm not.
You don't have to tell us her names or anything,
no.
but she contacted you because there was images on Facebook of her, and then she.
Well, yeah, I was posting, not specifically of her. I posted images of this from this documentary in my, as I was trying to raise awareness about it, and it was an automated message I received from her asking her to please remove this photograph. But I didn't know who this person was. I found some of her photos from her Facebook page. And I didn't recognise her from the BBC's footage, but then just a couple of weeks later there was I found some YouTube footage also from the same hospital on the same day, from the same alleged event, and there she was, with this white cream on her face portraying a victim. And since then I've identified her from her Facebook page, and I've spoken to friends of hers or acquaintances of hers who confirm her identity and are very angry with her because she's a person of Armenian heritage who travelled to the Netherlands. I think she sought asylum in the Netherlands about 20 years ago. And from her Facebook page, I can see that she goes backwards and forwards between the Netherlands and Syria. And there's a gap in her Facebook posts around the time this attack's supposed to have happened in August 2013. And friends have identified her. So we have this person who took part in this staged atrocity, which was filmed by the BBC, and as I say, zero interest in journalists in finding her and interviewing her. I could see from her current Facebook post that she isn't scarred by an incendiary bomb or a napalm. She had this cream on her face, but she's fine. So she's a key witness who needs to be interviewed.
Well, and journalists, what are you doing? We need to share this broadcast. When I worked at ITV Central in Oxford, I worked with Alistair Bunkle and Sarah Jane Mee in ITV in Birmingham. They're very high-profile reporters now on Sky News, and a number of others at Daybreak, I think it's called, Louisa James, Katie Ricketts. I work with all of these people, and I want to know what they're doing because I work with them, and I wanted to be a journalist because I felt it was very important. Journalism plays a very important role in holding power to account and making sure that this kind of thing isn't reported as fact. Because at the end of the day, what we're saying is it was completely staged. Yes. The injuries were staged. The BBC reported it as fact in BBC Panorama programme, and it led America, the UK, and France to go to war. Is that right?
No, in the event that we didn't join, Obama's red line wasn't crossed, I believe. So we didn't attack at that time. But this was the intention, and it's quite interesting that this. Everybody assumed that this vote by Cameron's government in 2013 was in the bag. So I believe that this report on the news at 10 on that night was really to reassure that the Western public that we were doing the right thing. In the event, it didn't happen. And quite interesting is the fact that the Panorama programme would ordinarily have gone out the following Monday. That was on Thursday evening. It would have ordinarily gone out on the Monday afterwards. It actually was postponed. It was for a month, it would seem, and it went out in a graveyard slot a month later at the end of September, with another Panorama earlier in the evening, which is kind of unheard of. So it was obvious that the plan, things didn't go to plan.
So they actually had this documentary lined up to affect political decisions, and we're going to broadcast it on the day of the vote. Is that right? The day before the vote?
Yeah, I think the assumption was that the political decision was in the bag, and so this was kind of just reinforcing, public opinion against the Syrian government. I don't know precisely if the Panorama programme had been fully edited and finished, but looking at the schedules from 2013, Monday evenings were when the Panoramas were going out, and this one didn't. They waited a month.
I see. It's available on Vimeo, isn't it? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, another important point which other people have noticed, and I sort of, which I didn't notice myself until quite late, is that the fact that the Panorama crew were actually embedded with an ISIS partner group when they were filming this program. Now, this is quite astonishing. It's something I've flagged up everywhere with lots of journalists, and again, zero interest. But the BBC Panorama crew were riding around with a group called Ahrar al-Sham, who were partners with ISIS. And 3 weeks before the BBC arrived in Syria, ISIS, Ahrar al-Sham, and other groups were committing atrocities in Latakia, slaughtering people, kidnapping people, and yet the BBC were then riding around with them 3 weeks later. In the Panorama programme, the BBC crew go through an ISIS checkpoint, and it's all very dramatic music. But the fact is that ISIS and the cars in this convoy, the group in this convoy, were partners. So it leads you to believe there's some element of staging going on with this as well.
People trust still the mainstream media, and what I would say what's really, really important is people like Robert, who's devoted the last 5 years and it's taken a huge amount of toll on you. You've lost your job recently. You've done all of this in your own spare time. You haven't been given any money to do this. And the work that I'm doing, I'm travelling at my own expense, trying to expose these stories. We've got social media. It's not really, for me, social media anymore. It's the new media. And if we keep calling them mainstream media, they're clearly not doing their job on many different issues. And the problem is that children are suffering. And if you think about the wars that have taken place, and we've been led to believe that they were justified in some way, You've really focused on that BBC Panorama documentary from 2013, but do you have a broader kind of view of the situation that's going on in Syria and how the media are reporting it and how the politicians are telling us what's going on?
Well, I think we've been fed 360 degrees truth reversal on Syria from day one. But I'm not. As you say, I really am focused on this because I do believe that this BBC Panorama programme, Saving Syria's Children, is absolutely historic. There's no other instance where any news organisation, anywhere, globally, has faked an atrocity with, I can't call them actors because they're not good enough to be called actors, volunteers, or maybe they were given a few, dollars. But, this is a real watershed. A huge watershed. So I think. And
you've known about it for 5 years, and no mainstream media journalist has picked up on it other than Victor Lewis Smith.
No, a few sort of independent people like Victor and Craig Murray, the former UK ambassador, Jonathan Cook. Some bloggers have put their heads above the parapet, but nobody in the mainstream will do it. Nobody whose career depends on the corporate media will talk about this. I tweet about it. Silence. Not even. I don't even get called a conspiracy theorist. My arguments aren't refuted. Just silence.
Piers Robinson is a journalism professor up in Sheffield. He's retweeted and shared your stuff, and you've talked at events with him as well. Some people might know Piers Robinson or have heard of him, but some reports in the mainstream media have called some of them, professor propaganda or conspiracy theorist. And what's the difference between a conspiracy theorist and an investigative journalist? I would say what you're doing is real journalism. And what we can do, if you're watching this, is to share the broadcast. I talk a little bit about this in my book, which is called Making the News 2018, My Experiences in the Newsroom, which I hopefully find an interesting read. All the profits from that book go to sharing the stories, boosting posts like this. And you have an important crowdfunder that you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit about this, and we'll make sure that we mention it?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's been in progress for a little while because it's been a sort of turbulent couple of years. Since Victor Lewis Smith became involved and mooted the idea of a crowdfunder, we've been moving that forward, and we're hopefully ready to launch in the next few weeks.
Keith Allen's been involved, is that right?
Keith Allen has fronted the crowdfunding teaser. Well, hopefully he'll be involved in the project as well if we get that going, if we raise enough money. We don't have any money at the moment. It's always good to start a crowdfunder with something in the pot, but we might have to start it with quite a low.
It's taken its toll on you, and I just want people to say, to see what you've done. I want to say thank you. And I'm going to be talking to you again in a little bit more detail. We're going to be providing some of the footage from this documentary. And to think, for me, the BBC Panorama job, to get a job at the BBC Panorama, I always thought that was the creme de la creme, the best you could get, I really did. For me, that was the height of achievement as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, and now obviously I feel very differently. But thank you very much for talking to me. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think, no, let's carry this on in the interview.
We need to see the footage.
Yeah.
please do follow this page, because we're going to be doing a broader piece on this and having a look at this footage in a little bit more detail of the actual evidence relating to this incident being staged, which was reported by the BBC. Okay, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Goodbye.